My wife cheated and tried to take my business. She didn't know I was 10 steps ahead. I always believed that staying calm was my superpower, and maybe that is why nothing prepared me for the day my world tilted just enough to show me who my wife really was. My name is Daniel, and for most of my adult life, I thought I had built something solid with my wife, Melissa. We started from nothing, built a small marketing company together, and slowly turned it into a business big enough to give us comfort and stability. People said we were the couple others looked up to, but life has a funny way of showing you how fragile trust can be. The first sign came when Melissa began behaving with this cold, sharp edge that never used to be there, as if everything I said annoyed her, and everything she said carried a layer of contempt she did not even try to hide. I tried to talk to her, but she brushed me off every time, saying I was imagining things, and I chose to stay calm, even when her tone felt like a brick thrown at glass. Weeks passed, and then came the moment that cracked everything open. A friend of mine, Josh, pulled me aside after a meeting and looked at me with a seriousness that left no room for jokes. He told me that Melissa was seeing someone else, and that the rumor had been going around for a while. I felt something drop inside me, but I did not react, because losing control never solves anything. Instead, I thanked him and went home with the same steady walk I always had, even though my chest felt like it was folding in on itself. That night, while Melissa was in the shower, her phone lit up on the counter, and the message on the screen was enough to confirm everything I needed to know. I did not touch her phone. I did not confront her. I simply stepped back and allowed the truth to sit in front of me like a math equation I now had to solve. Melissa came out and looked at me with that same irritated expression, like I was the problem in her life and not the man who had carried this family for years. She muttered something under her breath about how I never did anything right, and that was the moment I realized she no longer saw me as a partner, but as a stepping stone she was tired of standing on. I stayed calm because anger clouds judgment, and judgment was exactly what I needed. The next day, I met with my lawyer, Ethan, a man who had seen enough messy divorces to know that the first person who loses control usually loses everything. I explained everything to him, and he nodded with a quiet understanding, saying that Melissa's behavior made things easier legally, especially if she planned to come after the business. I walked out of his office with a strange sense of focus, like the storm had already begun, but I was the only one holding an umbrella. Melissa still had no idea I knew anything, and for now that was my advantage. The strange thing about betrayal is how quickly it sharpens your senses. The morning after meeting with Ethan, I walked into my office with a calmness that felt almost rehearsed, and while my employees moved around like any normal day, I felt every detail more clearly: the clicking keyboards, the faint hum of the AC, the quiet confidence inside me growing with every step. Melissa texted me around noon asking why I had left so early, and her tone was clipped and irritated, as if my schedule existed only to inconvenience her. I replied politely and kept the conversation short because I knew every message she sent from now on mattered more than she realized. When I returned home, she was already there, pacing in the kitchen with that sharp look she always wore lately. She started complaining about everything: the house, the bills, the business, acting as if none of it was connected to years of work I had poured into building a life for us. She spoke to me like a stranger she was tired of tolerating, and I let her talk without interruption, because every word revealed who she had become. At one point, she even said I owed her more attention and more money because she had put up with my so-called obsession with work. That sentence was enough to confirm what Ethan had predicted. She was preparing to claim part of the company, maybe even most of it. She thought she could push me into snapping or defending myself emotionally, and that would give her leverage in court, but I refused to play her game, and the more calm I stayed, the angrier she became. Later that evening, she stormed out claiming she needed fresh air, which was something she always said when she was going to see him. I sat down at the dining table and organized everything I knew into a simple plan, because I did not need revenge. I only needed clarity and fairness. First step: gather proof without violating any boundaries. Second step: secure the company legally. Third step: keep communication with her polite and neutral, so her behavior would stand in contrast in every record. When she came back late that night, she did not bother hiding her bad mood. She accused me of being distant and ruining the marriage, which was almost ironic given the truth she was hiding. I answered with steady calmness, something like, "I am sorry you feel this way, Melissa. We can talk when things settle." And she rolled her eyes like she could not stand the sound of my voice. But inside, I already knew the momentum had shifted. She thought she was the one in control. She thought her contempt would break me, But she had no idea that quiet people are often the hardest to knock down. Before going to bed, I checked an email from Ethan with documents already prepared and instructions for what to do next. As I read through each line, I felt a sense of direction stronger than anything I had felt in years, because this time the business, the truth, and my future were all in my hands. Over the next few days, I moved through my life with the same quiet rhythm as always, but inside every step had purpose. Melissa continued acting like a storm trapped in a small room, snapping at everything I did and blaming me for problems she had created long before I even suspected anything. She talked to me like I was an inconvenience and walked around the house with this confidence that told me she truly believed she would walk away with half the company, maybe more. She underestimated me simply because I refused to raise my voice. Calm people confuse aggressive people because they expect resistance, not strategy. Meanwhile, Ethan guided me through every detail, arranging documents, securing ownership, confirming that the company had been built from my personal investment and long before marriage, which made things even cleaner legally. I kept communication with Melissa polite and minimal, every message neutral, every tone balanced, because Ethan said the court rarely favors the one who looks unstable, and Melissa was doing a great job of writing her own downfall. One afternoon, she came into my office at home and said she wanted a meeting with our accountant because she needed access to financial records. She said it in a tone that implied the business existed because of her, even though she had not touched a spreadsheet in years. I told her calmly that everything was already handled and she did not need to worry, which made her explode into a speech about how she deserved more credit, how she wanted ownership, how she sacrificed so much. She paced the room, waving her hands and raising her voice, but I stayed seated with steady breathing, letting her words fill the air without absorbing any of them, because reacting would only help her. That night she left again without explanation, and when she returned she acted overly cheerful in a way that made the entire house feel artificial. She asked if I wanted takeout, then criticized my answer, then walked away laughing at something on her phone. Every moment with her confirmed that somewhere along the way she had decided she no longer respected me, but still wanted everything I built. Instead of letting that break me, it clarified my path forward. The next morning, Ethan called and told me we were ready for the final step, securing full control of the company and preparing for any claims she might attempt. Once that was complete, we could move toward the divorce with confidence. Hearing that lifted something heavy from my chest, because for the first time I could see the exit. I walked out onto the porch, looked at the quiet street, and realized the strangest thing. Even though Melissa had tried to tear me down with her betrayal and disrespect, I felt stronger, steadier, and more focused than I had been in years. She thought she was taking power from me, but all she had done was reveal the strength I had forgotten I possessed. A week later, everything shifted faster than I expected because Melissa finally revealed her full plan. It started on a Friday morning when she walked into the kitchen with this forced calm smile that told me she had rehearsed whatever she was about to say. She sat across from me and announced that she wanted a separation and that she would be taking her share of the business since she believed she had contributed just as much as I had. Her tone was sharp, confident, almost triumphant, and she watched my face, waiting for a reaction, any reaction, but I gave her nothing, just a quiet nod and a simple "I understand." Melissa, she seemed thrown off by how calm I was and continued rambling about how the marriage had been draining, how she deserved financial security, how she had carried emotional weight I never appreciated. She said all of this while tapping her manicured nails on the table as if she were negotiating a contract she assumed she already won. What she did not know was that Ethan had prepared everything and her words were arriving months too late. I told her kindly that we could handle everything through proper channels and that I wanted things to remain respectful. She rolled her eyes and muttered that respect left this house a long time ago, then walked out like she had just delivered the final blow. But the moment the door closed behind her, I exhaled and felt the calmest I had felt in months, because now everything was moving exactly where it needed to go. That afternoon, Ethan submitted the paperwork securing the business under my sole ownership with all documentation to prove it, predating the marriage and supported by a timeline Melissa could not argue against. When she returned home later, she was in an inexplicably cheerful mood, humming as if she were the one who had made progress. She told me she had spoken with someone about her rights, and that I should prepare myself because she was not going to walk away with nothing. I simply nodded and wished her a good night, which confused her even more. Aggressive people expect a fight, they expect emotional chaos, they expect someone to break down and give them ammunition. But when all they face is silence and clarity, they lose their footing, and that is exactly what began happening. The next morning, she confronted me asking why I was so calm, why I was not arguing, why I was not afraid. She asked it with this mix of frustration and suspicion, as if she sensed something was happening behind the scenes, but could not see it. I told her with a steady voice that adults handle difficult situations with patience and fairness. And she stared at me like I was speaking a language she had never heard before. That was the moment I knew the balance of power had shifted for good, and she was finally realizing that the storm she had tried to create could no longer shake me at all. The following days felt like watching a slow unraveling, because Melissa's confidence began cracking in real time. Every morning, she woke up expecting me to panic or argue or beg, but instead, she found me calm, making coffee, going to work, handling my routines like nothing around me was collapsing. She did not know that clarity makes everything simpler, and when you know the truth and your path, you stop carrying the weight of someone else's chaos. One evening, she confronted me again, saying she had spoken to someone who promised she could take half the company, maybe even more, and when she said it, her eyes lit up with that sharp confidence she used whenever she thought she had leverage. But when I told her gently that she was mistaken and that everything would be handled legally, she froze for a moment like her brain had missed a step. She demanded to know what I meant, and I simply said, the documents speak for themselves, Melissa, everything is already in place. Her face shifted instantly, the confidence slipping into irritation, then confusion, and finally a flash of fear. She tried to cover up. She stormed out of the room, insisting she would not let me walk away with everything, but I did not respond, because arguing with someone who thrives on conflict only feeds them. The next morning, Ethan called to tell me the final confirmations were complete, and the business was fully secured with a protective structure that left no room for challenge. Hearing that felt like stepping into sunlight after months of clouds, because for the first time I could breathe without pressure on my chest. Later that day, Melissa sent me a long text accusing me of being distant, cold, uncaring, and unsupportive. She said the marriage had died because I focused too much on work and not enough on her needs. It was ironic to read, knowing she had betrayed me long before any of this began, but I stayed calm because clinging to fairness always reveals the truth eventually. Late that night, she came home and asked if I wanted to talk, but her tone was not soft, it was calculating, like she was trying to read my reactions so she could adjust her strategy. I told her politely that I was open to conversation, but only with honesty and respect, and that seemed to unsettle her even more. She snapped that I was acting superior and cold, and that she would make sure I regretted treating her this way, but every threat she threw at me only highlighted the distance between us, because she still believed she controlled the narrative and had no idea that every move she made only strengthened my position. When I went to bed that night, I realized something important. The goal was never to defeat her or win some emotional war. The goal was simply to protect my peace, my work, and my dignity. And for the first time, I felt all three firmly in my hands. The next week felt like standing in the eye of a storm while everything around me slowly revealed its true shape. Melissa's behavior became unpredictable, shifting from cold silence to sudden bursts of forced friendliness, and every change in her tone told me she was losing confidence in whatever plan she thought she had. She started asking more questions about the company, pretending to care about things she never cared about before, and every time she asked, I answered with calm, simple statements, nothing emotional, nothing defensive, just facts. The more steady I stayed, the more unsettled she became, because people who use aggression as power unravel when they cannot shake the person standing in front of them. One evening, she came into the living room and sat across from me with her arms crossed and her voice strangely calm. She said she wanted to talk about the divorce and how we could divide everything fairly. She tried to sound reasonable, but her eyes betrayed her real intention. She was still expecting to walk away with half of my life. I nodded and told her everything would be handled according to the law and that fairness would come from the truth, not from emotion. She asked what that meant, and I said something very simple: all the documents are already in place, Melissa, everything will follow the facts. She stared at me with confusion, because for the first time she sensed she no longer controlled the direction of the conversation. The next morning, she received a notice from Ethan confirming the legal status of the business and outlining the structure that secured it entirely under my ownership. I was in my office when I heard the front door slam and her footsteps moving quickly down the hallway. She came in holding the papers, looking furious and shocked at the same time. She demanded to know how this happened when she believed she was entitled to everything and why I would do this to her after all the years we spent together. She spoke loudly, pacing the room, waiting for me to match her energy, but I stayed seated, hands folded, calm and steady. I told her that I did not do anything to her. I simply protected what I built long before she chose to step away from our marriage in every way that mattered. She accused me of being heartless, of being manipulative, of being cold, but none of her words carried the weight they once did, because the truth had already separated us completely. She left the room shaking her head, saying she would find a way to fight it, but the fear in her voice told a different story. That evening, Ethan called to check in and asked how I was holding up, and when I answered, I felt something genuine inside me for the first time in months. I said, I am okay, really okay. Because knowing the truth and staying calm through every moment had brought me to a place where her chaos could no longer touch me. The storm was still swirling, but for the first time, I felt the ground under my feet steady and unshakable. The days that followed revealed more truth about Melissa than the entire marriage before it, because once she realized she could not take the business, she shifted into a new version of herself, one built on desperation and pride. She started making loud phone calls in the living room, speaking just loudly enough for me to hear her, saying things like, "He thinks he outsmarted me," or "I am not walking away with nothing." She wanted a reaction, but my silence was stronger than any argument I could have offered. Calmness became a mirror that showed her the reality she had been hiding from herself. One afternoon, she tried a different tactic. She came into my office with a soft expression and asked if we could rethink everything. She said, "Maybe we rush this, maybe we can fix what is broken, maybe we can start over." Her voice was gentle, but her eyes were calculating, as if she were testing whether she still had influence over me. I listened without interrupting, because letting people speak freely always reveals their true intention. When she finished, I thanked her for expressing her feelings, but told her clearly and calmly that rebuilding trust is not possible when the foundation is built on betrayal, disrespect, and hidden motives. The minute she realized I was not stepping back into the marriage, her softness dissolved, and she snapped, accusing me of being cold and ungrateful. She stormed out of the room again, but this time the anger looked more like panic. Later that evening, I received an email from Ethan confirming the divorce meeting date and the structure of the settlement, everything organized, clean, and undeniable. I sat on the couch, reading the details, and felt a sense of closure forming quietly inside me. Melissa walked in moments later, asking what I was reading, and when I said it was from my attorney, she froze for a second, then tried to play it off with a shrug, saying, "Do whatever you want, Daniel," but her voice was trembling slightly. I could see the shift happening in real time the moment she realized she had lost the control she once held so tightly. That night, I went for a long drive, something I had not done in months. And as the city lights passed by, I could feel the weight of the past lifting piece by piece. I thought about how someone can share a life with you and still choose resentment over honesty, how they can take your kindness for weakness and confuse calmness with submission. But betrayal has a strange gift. It shows you who you really are, not the version someone tries to convince you of, but the quiet, resilient, steady version you forget to notice. When I returned home, the house was silent. Melissa was in the bedroom with the door closed, and for the first time that silence felt peaceful, not tense, not heavy, just peaceful. The ending was getting closer, and despite everything, I felt steady, ready, and unafraid of whatever came next. The morning of the meeting with our attorneys arrived with a kind of quiet finality, the kind you feel in your chest before a major turning point. Melissa barely spoke during breakfast. She kept glancing at her phone, then at me, then away again, like she was searching for some last-minute advantage that refused to appear. When we arrived at the office, her posture changed. She straightened her back, lifted her chin, and walked in with the same sharp confidence she always used when she wanted to seem untouchable. But her eyes were uneasy, and I could see the doubt sitting behind them. We sat across from each other in a glass conference room, and for the first time the silence between us felt like truth instead of tension. Ethan reviewed the documents calmly, explaining each section, outlining the assets, clarifying the protections around the business, and making sure every detail was presented clearly. Melissa's attorney looked through everything quietly, and after a few minutes leaned over to whisper something in her ear. Whatever he said made her face tighten. She snapped that something was missing, that she deserved more, that she had given years of her life to this marriage and deserved compensation. Her voice echoed slightly in the room, but no one responded to the emotion behind it, because law does not bend for anger. I stayed still, hands folded, breathing evenly. Because this was the moment I had prepared for, not to win, but simply to hold on to what was mine. Her attorney gently explained that the documents were solid, the timeline was clean, and that contesting them would be costly and likely unsuccessful. Melissa stared at him in disbelief, then at me, as if she expected me to say something to rescue her pride, but there was nothing left to rescue because she had torn through every piece of trust months ago. She said I was cruel for protecting myself and that I should feel ashamed for leaving her with nothing. I answered with the same calm that had carried me through every moment up to this one. I said, Melissa, I did not take anything from you. I simply kept what I built and what you walked away from long before today. She leaned back in her chair, speechless for the first time since the betrayal began, and the entire room felt still for a moment. Ethan continued through the final details, outlining the separation of accounts, the division of neutral assets, and the clean exit path for both of us. Once everything was signed, Melissa stood up, quickly grabbed her purse, and walked out without looking back, her footsteps echoing down the hallway. I stayed seated for a moment, letting the reality settle like dust in sunlight. The storm that had consumed months of my life was finally ending, and for the first time in a long time, I could feel space opening in my chest, space for calm, for clarity, for a future not shaped by chaos. When the door closed behind Melissa that day, something in me finally clicked into place, like a heavy weight settling exactly where it belonged. I stepped outside the building, and the air felt different, not colder, not warmer, just clearer, like someone finally wiped the fog off the windows of my life. I drove home slowly, letting the silence in the car settle around me, because after months of tension, the quiet felt like a luxury I had forgotten how to enjoy. When I walked into the house, everything looked the same, but nothing felt the same. The walls were no longer holding her anger. The rooms were no longer filled with her resentment. The air was no longer heavy with her expectations. It was just a home again, and for the first time in a long time, I felt present inside it. A few days later, Melissa sent one final message saying she hoped I was happy with what I had done, that I had ruined everything, and that I would regret letting her go. I read it and felt nothing, not anger, not sadness, not satisfaction, just acceptance, because sometimes letting go is not about losing someone, it is about releasing the version of yourself that tolerated their chaos for too long. I replied with a single calm line, I wish you peace moving forward, Melissa. After that, she disappeared from my life entirely, and the silence she left behind was not empty, it was healing. Over the next weeks, I focused on work, rebuilding routines, reconnecting with people I had unintentionally pushed away during the turmoil. I found myself waking up earlier, feeling lighter, drinking my morning coffee with a quiet sense of gratitude for the simple stability of the day. The business began to thrive again, now that my energy was no longer spent managing someone else's storms. One evening, I sat on the porch watching the sun go down and realized something I had never fully understood before. Strength is not loud or aggressive. It does not look like winning an argument or proving someone wrong. Real strength is steady. It is choosing calm when chaos invites you to break. It is protecting what matters with clarity, not fear. It is trusting that dignity speaks louder than anger ever could. Melissa tried to take everything from me, not because she needed it, but because she thought I was too calm, too gentle, too steady to fight back. What she never understood was that calmness is not weakness. Calmness is discipline, and discipline builds foundations no one can shake. I did not win against her. I simply stood my ground, and the truth did the rest. As the last light faded, I felt a quiet certainty settle in my chest. The past was behind me, the storm was gone, and the future finally belonged to me again, steady, clear, and full of possibilities I had almost forgotten how to imagine.